The notification from our joint bank account lit up my phone screen at 3:47 a.m. In the darkness of our bedroom, the harsh blue light illuminated the empty space beside me where Marcus should have been sleeping. Transfer complete. The words burned into my retinas as I stared at the zero balance where our life savings had been just moments before. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. Instead, I felt an eerie calm wash over me as 12 years of marriage crystallized into this single moment of betrayal. The signs had been there. The late-night phone calls he took in the garage, the mysterious business trips that yielded no expense reports, the gradual emotional distance that had grown between us like a glacier. "Going to make us rich, babe," he'd promised just last week, his brown eyes sparkling with that familiar excitement I'd once found charming. "This investment is guaranteed. We just need to be bold." I'd nodded and smiled, playing my part perfectly, while making sure the hidden camera in my home office caught every word of his pitch. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Each time he'd brought up accessing our savings, each time he'd hinted at his foolproof plan, I'd been documenting, recording, and quietly moving assets he didn't know about to separate accounts. The successful physical therapy practice I'd built, from the ground up, the one that had funded his increasingly lavish lifestyle, was safely out of his reach. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. "I'm sorry. Had to take this opportunity. You'll thank me when we're millionaires." I could almost hear his confident tone, the same one he'd used to convince me to invest in his brother's failed restaurant chain last year. The same voice that had talked 3 of our friends into refinancing their homes for his phantom real estate deals. I opened my laptop, the soft whir of its fan the only sound in our too-quiet house. With a few keystrokes, I accessed the private investigator's latest report. Marcus's mistress in Atlanta, a supposedly wealthy widow he'd met at a golf resort, was actually an actress I'd hired. Every desperate investment proposal, every secret meeting, every frantic phone call had been carefully orchestrated and documented. "Your husband's flight to the Cayman Islands just boarded," the investigator's message confirmed. Phase 1 complete. I allowed myself a small smile. Marcus thought he was fleeing with our life savings to meet his mystery woman. Instead, he was walking into a trap that had taken me half a year to set. Dawn was breaking over our suburban neighborhood as I began making calls. First to my attorney, then to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The evidence was overwhelming. Wire fraud, investment scams, conspiracy to commit theft. The documents spread across my desk told the story of a man who'd been running increasingly elaborate confidence schemes, using our marriage as a respectable front. "Marie?" My assistant's voice came through the phone. "The news just broke about the international investment fraud ring. Should we reschedule your morning patients?" "No," I replied, straightening my spine. "Keep the schedule exactly as it is." After all, I had built my practice by helping people recover, rebuild, strengthen themselves. Today would be no different, except this time, I was both the therapist and the patient, methodically working through the rehabilitation of my life. The next few hours would bring chaos. Shocked friends discovering their investments were gone. Bank investigators, FBI agents. But for now, in the quiet morning light, I reviewed my carefully crafted plan. Marcus thought he was the con artist, but he never realized he'd married someone far more patient and methodical than himself. Soon enough, he'd learn that his greatest mistake wasn't stealing our savings. It was underestimating his wife. The FBI agents arrived precisely when I expected them, 9 a.m. sharp. Special Agent Lisa Chen carried a familiar-looking file, one I'd helped compile over the last 6 months. "Mrs. Anderson, we need to discuss your husband's involvement in several investment schemes," she began, settling into my home office. I noticed her eyes taking in the tasteful decor, the careful organization, searching for signs of a life unraveled. "Of course," I replied, retrieving my own documentation. I assume you've received the files I've been sending to your financial crimes division? Agent Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, someone had failed to brief her on just how cooperative this particular fraud victim planned to be. My laptop screen flickered with incoming emails, panicked messages from other victims just discovering their losses. Richard and Susan Martinez, who'd invested their retirement fund, the Patels, who'd mortgaged their restaurant, Dr. Thompson, who'd liquidated his children's college funds. All of them had trusted Marcus, believing in the respectable facade we'd presented as a couple. Mrs. Anderson, Agent Chen leaned forward. These records are extraordinary. You've documented every transaction, every meeting, every phone call. I pulled up the video footage from our home security system, showing Marcus's late-night calls, his nervous pacing, his gradual transformation from charming husband to desperate conman. Your husband's victims, she began, but I cut her off gently, are all being contacted by my legal team as we speak. The class action lawsuit is already prepared. I handed her another file. You'll find evidence of similar schemes in 3 other states, under different aliases. A notification popped up on my phone. Marcus had landed in the Cayman Islands. Right on schedule, my investigators' assets would be moving into position. The trap was set, but timing would be crucial. There's something else you should see, I said, pulling up the offshore banking records I'd spent months tracing. These accounts show a pattern of international transfers dating back 2 years. But if you look carefully, I highlighted a series of transactions, watching understanding. Dawn in Agent Chen's eyes. He's not working alone, she concluded. This is too sophisticated for one person. I nodded, suppressing a smile. Marcus had always thought himself clever, but his digital footprints were embarrassingly obvious to anyone who knew where to look. Office phone lit up. The receptionist from my physical therapy practice. Dr. Marie, the reporter from the Financial Times is here for your statement about the fraud case. Perfect timing. The media coverage would ensure Marcus couldn't quietly disappear into anonymity. Mrs. Anderson, Agent Chen was studying me with new interest. Most victims we deal with are devastated, blindsided. You seem prepared. I met her gaze steadily. Agent Chen, when you've spent your career helping people rebuild after trauma, you learn to recognize the warning signs. And more importantly, you learn how to prepare for recovery. My phone buzzed again, a message from my contact in the Caymans. Marcus had just checked into the Ocean View Resort, the same hotel where he believed his wealthy widow awaited. Instead, he'd find an international task force specializing in financial crimes. One last thing, I told Agent Chen, presenting a final document. You'll want this. A complete record of every client Marcus defrauded while working at Morgan Stanley 5 years ago before he met me. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on those crimes. As the agent left with her arms full of evidence, I turned to my window, watching the morning sun illuminate our carefully landscaped garden. By now, Marcus would be settling into his luxury suite, probably ordering champagne, anticipating a celebratory meeting with his mystery woman. He had no idea he'd just walked into a carefully choreographed performance, where every player, from the hotel staff to his supposed co-conspirators, was following my script. The countdown had begun. In exactly 24 hours, Marcus would learn the true meaning of guaranteed investment. The Ocean View Resort's security feed played silently on my laptop, showing Marcus in his natural element, charming the hotel staff, tipping generously with stolen money, radiating the confidence of a man who thought he'd won. I watched him, check his phone repeatedly, waiting for a message from his wealthy widow that would never come. Target is getting anxious, my investigator reported via encrypted chat. He's called the front desk 3 times asking about messages. I checked the time, 6:47 p.m. Right about now, Marcus would be discovering that his attempts to transfer funds from our drained accounts weren't going through. My burner phone buzzed, a desperate text from my husband. "Marie, something's wrong with the accounts. Need you to call the bank." I let out a small laugh. The accent wall behind my desk, the one Marcus had insisted we paint his favorite shade of blue, now held a hidden wall safe containing every incriminating document he'd tried to destroy over the years. Sarah, my most trusted colleague at the physical therapy practice, entered with a stack of newspapers. "The story's hitting the press," she announced, spreading them across my desk. Headlines screamed about the multi-state investment fraud scheme. Marcus's photo, taken from our last charity gala, stared up from every front page. "His mother's been calling the office nonstop," Sarah continued, pulling up the message log. "Says she can't believe her perfect son would do this." The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret Anderson had spent years bragging about her brilliant boy, the successful investment manager who'd married a simple physical therapist. My secure laptop pinged with an alert. Marcus had just tried to access his hidden cryptocurrency wallet, the one he thought I knew nothing about. What he'd find instead was an empty account and a trail leading straight to a network of investigator-controlled wallets. "The Cayman Islands Banking Authority is moving into position," my investigator messaged. "Local police are standing by. Should I give the signal?" I checked my watch, considering the timing. Marcus needed one more push, one final moment of false security before the trap sprung shut. "Not yet," I replied. "Let him make the dinner reservation first." Sure enough, within minutes, Marcus booked a table for two at the resort's most expensive restaurant. Ever predictable, he'd choose the most visible spot to meet his mystery woman, wanting to be seen with his glamorous new partner. A notification from my banking app showed another attempted transfer from Marcus, this time trying to access my business accounts. The same accounts that, on paper, looked like a modest physical therapy practice, but actually held the profits from 12 years of careful investment and expansion. "Dr. Marie," my assistant's voice came through the intercom, "the forensic accountant's report just arrived." I opened the encrypted file, scanning the detailed analysis of Marcus's schemes. The web of fraud was breathtaking in its complexity and its sloppiness. He'd left evidence everywhere, too confident in his ability to stay one step ahead. My office door opened again, this time revealing Detective Roberts from the local police department. "We've finished interviewing the local victims," he reported, placing a thick file on my desk. 23 people in this county alone. Your husband was busy." I pulled up the resort's security feed again. Marcus sat at the hotel bar, nursing an expensive scotch, still checking his phone. In his mounting desperation, he hadn't noticed. The plainclothes officers gradually filling the room hadn't recognized the bartender as an undercover agent. "He just tried to book a private plane," my investigator reported, "using one of his fake corporate cards." I smiled, remembering how proud Marcus had been of those cards, not realizing every transaction was being logged and traced. "Give him 10 more minutes," I instructed. "Let him finish that scotch, then signal the authorities." I turned to the wall of windows in my office, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of justice. Marcus had always claimed I was bad with money, too naive to understand high finance. He was about to discover just how wrong he'd been about his quiet, methodical wife. Agent Chen's voice crackled through my encrypted line. "Operations live in 3 minutes." I watched the hotel's security feeds split across my monitors, each camera angle revealing another piece of the closing trap. Marcus had moved from the bar to his reserved table, straightening his Rolex, the one he'd bought with the Thompsons' investment money. The hotel's maitre d' approached his table, offering a bottle of champagne, compliments of Ms. Devon, the wealthy widow's alias. Marcus's face lit up with that familiar predatory smile. He hadn't noticed that the sommelier was an Interpol agent, or that the couple at the next table were from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "Package delivered," my Investigator confirmed. The champagne came with a handwritten note suggesting a meeting in the hotel's private marina in 30 minutes. A final touch of theater before the curtain fell. Marcus practically bounced in his seat, no doubt already calculating how to charm. More money from his mystery woman. My secure laptop pinged with alerts from 5 different banks. Marcus's desperate attempts to move money had triggered every fraud detection system I'd carefully primed. Each failed transaction added another layer to the criminal charges building against him. Marie, Sarah appeared in my doorway. The victims. Support group is assembled in the conference room. I nodded, pulling up the live stream from our office's largest meeting space. 23 faces filled the screen, each person representing a family Marcus had devastated. They'd come seeking answers, unaware that their meeting was being recorded as evidence. Rolling news coverage in 2 minutes, my media coordinator reported. The story would break simultaneously across 3 continents, ensuring Marcus couldn't slip away in the chaos. I'd learned from his previous schemes. He'd always used media confusion as cover for his escapes. My phone lit up with a message from Marcus's mother. "Whatever he's done, you need to stand by him. That's what a good wife does." I archived the text with the others, additional evidence of the enabling behavior that had helped create the monster wearing my wedding ring. The hotel security feed showed Marcus heading toward the marina, practically swaggering. He'd changed into his power suit, the one he wore for closing big deals. The same suit he'd worn when convincing the Patels to refinance their restaurant, promising to double their investment. Target approaching designated area, Agent Chen. Updated. All units in position. I watched Marcus descend the steps to the private dock where a sleek yacht waited. The boat's name, Final Investment, was clearly visible. A little touch of irony I'd insisted on. A flash of red caught his attention. The wealthy widow's signature scarf, draped over a deck chair. Marcus stepped onto the yacht, straightening his tie. The trap was sprung. Within seconds, federal agents emerged from every hiding spot. I watched my husband's swagger crumble as realization dawned. "Federal agents, freeze!" The command echoed through my speakers. Marcus's face contorted in disbelief as Agent Chen approached with handcuffs. Right on cue, news helicopters appeared overhead, their cameras capturing every moment of the arrest. "Mrs. Anderson," my lawyer's voice came through the intercom. "The class action paperwork is ready. We've frozen every account we could trace." I pulled up the document on my screen. 78 pages detailing every fraud, every lie, every stolen dollar. My signature would start the process of recovery for all his victims. The news alerts began flooding in. International investment. Fraud ring busted. Prominent financial advisor arrested in Cayman Islands. Multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme uncovered. Each headline represented another nail in the coffin of Marcus's carefully constructed facade. "He's asking for you," Agent Chen reported. "Says you need to help him explain that it's all a misunderstanding." I could picture his expression, the same persuasive look he'd used countless times to talk his way out of trouble. But this time, his target audience wasn't a trusting investor or a charmed socialite. This time, he faced the full force of international law enforcement, armed with 6 months of meticulously gathered evidence. "Send in the forensic accounting team," I instructed my investigator. The real work was about to begin, unraveling every layer of Marcus's schemes, recovering every possible asset, ensuring justice for every victim. My husband had orchestrated his final confidence game, but I had directed the ultimate sting operation. The interrogation room feed played silently on my monitor as Marcus paced back and forth, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his confidence shattered. Through the window, I could see Agent Chen reviewing the evidence I'd provided. Photos, emails, bank statements, each one methodically organized and annotated. "His offshore accounts are being frozen as we speak," my financial investigator reported. Interpol just confirmed they've located 3 additional shell companies in Luxembourg. I added the information to my ever-growing database, watching as the full scope of Marcus's operation emerged. The victim support group had transformed my physical therapy practice's waiting room into a command center. Sarah coordinated with lawyers, accountants, and counselors, ensuring each family received both legal and emotional support. On the wall, a digital counter tracked recovered assets in real time. "Mrs. Anderson," my assistant interrupted. "Marcus's former secretary from Morgan Stanley is here. She says she has information about his previous schemes." Another piece falling into place. I'd tracked down Clara months ago, suspecting she knew more than she'd revealed during the initial investigation. The interview room camera showed Clara clutching a worn leather portfolio. "I kept copies of everything," she explained, hands trembling, as she spread documents across the table. Transaction records, client lists, even recorded phone calls. I knew someday someone would need to know the truth. My secure phone buzzed with an update from the Cayman Islands police. They'd found Marcus's go bag in his hotel room safe, cash, fake passports, and a handwritten list of potential targets. My name was at the top, along with an estimated net worth that made me smile. He'd underestimated that too. "The news networks are requesting interviews," my media coordinator announced. "They're particularly interested in how you orchestrated the sting." I declined each request with a simple form letter. The story wasn't about me. It was about the victims, about justice, about consequences. Agent Chen's voice came through my speaker. "He's ready to talk." I watched Marcus slump in his chair, the facade of the successful investment manager completely crumbled. On the table before him lay printouts of his text messages to me, each one documenting another lie. "The asset recovery team found something interesting," my investigator reported, sending over a new file. "Looks like he had a backup plan. Corporate apartments in 3 cities, each rented under different aliases." I forwarded the information to Agent Chen, another nail in Marcus's legal coffin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office as I reviewed the victim impact statements. Each story followed a similar pattern: trust built, dreams promised, lives shattered. But now, with every recovered dollar, those same lives could begin rebuilding. "Initial forensic accounting reports are in," Sarah announced, placing a thick folder on my desk. "They've traced most of the missing funds. The recovery process can begin within days." I nodded, thinking of the families waiting for news, for hope, for a chance to start over. A notification popped up. Marcus's lawyer had arrived at the police station. I pulled up the attorney's background check, unsurprised to find connections to previous financial fraud cases. Marcus always did have a pattern in choosing his associates. "The FBI's forensic team needs access to your home office," Agent Chen messaged. "They believe Marcus may have hidden documents in the walls during renovations." I smiled, remembering how insistent he'd been about supervising the construction personally. Another mistake in a long list of miscalculations. My investigators had already found 3 hidden safes, each containing evidence Marcus thought he'd destroyed. His meticulous record-keeping, meant to track his victories, now documented his crimes in damning detail. The support group coordinator appeared with an update. "The first round of recovered funds has been allocated. 10 families will receive initial payments this week. Small victories, but meaningful ones. Each restitution payment represented another step toward healing." As darkness fell over the city, I watched Marcus being led to a holding cell. His designer suit, now prison-issue sweats. His confident swagger, now defeated shuffling. The man who'd thought himself clever enough to con the world was learning that some schemes have consequences that no amount of charm can erase. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Marcus's arraignment approached. Through my tablet's security feed, I watched him adjust his orange jumpsuit, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of his former polished appearance. The designer stubble he'd cultivated had given way to genuine scruff, his manicured nails now bitten to the quick. 7 more victims came forward this morning, Sarah reported, sliding a new stack of files across my desk. 2 from his college, days, 5 from his first job at Goldman Sachs. Each file contained the same pattern: charming introductions, gradual trust building, devastating betrayal. Agent Chen appeared in my doorway, her expression grimly satisfied. The forensic accountants found his cryptocurrency wallets, all 37 of them. I nodded, pulling up my own records. For months, I'd tracked Marcus's digital footprint, watching him convert stolen funds into a maze of virtual currencies. His mother's being questioned by the SEC. My investigator's message popped up. Apparently, she was more than just an enabler. I accessed the interrogation feed, watching Margaret Anderson's carefully maintained composure crack under detailed questions about her own offshore accounts. The courthouse security camera showed Marcus's high-powered legal team arriving, their confidence notably dimmed after reviewing the mountain of evidence against their client. Their usual tactics: character assassination, procedural delays, jurisdictional challenges, would find no purchase against months of meticulous preparation. The victims' fund has reached a significant milestone, my financial advisor announced. We've recovered enough to ensure minimum restitution for everyone affected. The number on my screen represented more than money. It was validation, justice, a chance for healing. Local news crews clustered around the courthouse steps, but my attention was on the unmarked van arriving at the back entrance. Inside were boxes of evidence: Marcus's personal laptops, his hidden phones, the USB drives he'd thought were safely concealed in our garden's sprinkler system. His former partner from the Milwaukee operation is cooperating, Agent Chen informed. Was turned over everything: dates, accounts, names. Another piece of Marcus's past catching up with him. The partner's testimony would connect previously isolated incidents into a clear pattern of fraud. The prosecutor's office sent over their initial assessment: 15 federal charges, each carrying substantial prison time. Marcus's face on my monitor showed the first real signs of fear as his lawyers explained the potential consequences. No more luxury hotels, no more private clubs, no more easy marks. The Swiss authorities found something interesting, my investigator reported. A safety deposit box in Zurich, registered to an alias we hadn't known about. I authorized the necessary legal procedures to access it, curious what final secrets Marcus had tucked away. Sarah coordinated with trauma counselors, setting up support sessions for victims struggling with the aftermath of betrayal. My physical therapy practice had evolved into a different kind of healing center, helping people rebuild not just their finances, but their trust in others. The SEC wants to use this case as a template, Agent Chen mentioned, reviewing files on her tablet. Your documentation methods, the way you tracked everything. They're calling it the new gold standard for fraud investigation. A message from Marcus appeared on my burner phone. Please, Marie, you know I did it for us, for our future. I archived it with the others, evidence of his continuing attempts at manipulation. His future now consisted of concrete walls and prison bars. The district attorney entered my office, carrying preliminary plea deal paperwork. He's willing to cooperate, name names, reveal accounts. I studied the documents, noting the desperation between the lines. Marcus was finally realizing that his usual escape routes had been systematically closed off. Through the courthouse feed, I watched him lean close to his lawyers, gesturing frantically. The man who'd once commanded rooms with his charisma now couldn't even convince his own defense team to meet his eyes. In less than an hour, he would stand before a judge, and the full weight of his crimes would begin to descend. The media coordinator appeared with updated coverage statistics. The story had gone international, prompting investigations into similar schemes worldwide. Marcus's downfall was becoming a cautionary tale, his methods exposed as a textbook study in financial fraud. The first witness took the stand at exactly 9:15 a.m., a retired schoolteacher whose entire pension had vanished into Marcus's web of lies. Through my tablet's secure courtroom feed, I watched her hands tremble as she recounted how my husband had gained her trust during weekly church services, gradually positioning himself as a financial savior. Breaking news from Singapore, my investigator messaged. Local authorities just raided a consulting firm connected to Marcus's Asia Pacific operations. A series of photos appeared on my screen. Police leading handcuffed executives from a gleaming office tower, boxes of documents being loaded into evidence vans. Agent Chen slipped into the seat beside me in the courtroom's observation area, her expression tight. The private investigator who worked for Marcus last year, found dead in his apartment in Miami. I nodded, unsurprised. We'd anticipated casualties. It was why I'd insisted on such comprehensive security measures for everyone involved in the investigation. The prosecution's evidence display lit up with bank statements, each transaction painting a picture of calculated deception. Marcus shifted uncomfortably at the defense table, his lawyer's attempts to object systematically shut down by the judge. They hadn't expected this level of documentation, this degree of precision in tracking every stolen dollar. His college roommate came forward, Sarah texted from the office. Says Marcus ran a textbook scam their freshman year, targeting wealthy international students. Another piece of the puzzle, revealing how early the pattern had begun. The prosecution added the new witness to their growing list. The courtroom screens displayed Marcus's network of shell companies, each connection meticulously mapped. I watched the jury's expressions as they absorbed the scope of his deception. The retired teacher's pension was just one thread in a tapestry of fraud that stretched across continents. Interpol found the yacht, my investigator reported. The real one, not the decoy in the Caymans, hidden in a private marina in Montenegro. More assets to seize, more resources to return to his victims. The vessel's documentation revealed a fascinating web of ownership transfers, each designed to obscure its true purchaser. Marcus's face darkened as the prosecution introduced evidence from his earlier schemes. College scams, investment clubs, charity fraud, each venture building on the last, growing more sophisticated but leaving consistent patterns. His lawyer's attempts to suppress his previous history had failed spectacularly. The forensic accountants finished analyzing his mother's records, Agent Chen whispered. She wasn't just aware of the fraud, she helped launder money through her charitable foundation. On my screen, I watched Margaret Anderson being led into FBI headquarters, her designer handbag now holding a subpoena instead of stolen cash. The jury leaned forward as the prosecution played audio recordings. Marcus, in his own words, bragging about his conquests to supposed friends who were actually undercover agents. His practiced charm came through clearly, along with the calculated manipulation beneath it. Second witness is ready, the prosecutor messaged. This one was special. Marcus's former mentor, the man who'd introduced him to high finance fraud. He'd turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, prepared to detail every scheme he'd taught my husband. A notification from the victim's support group showed another milestone. 50 families now receiving recovery payments. Their lives slowly rebuilding from the wreckage of Marcus's schemes. Each restitution represented a small victory against the culture of financial predation he'd embraced. The courthouse security feed caught Marcus studying me during a brief recess, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. He still couldn't comprehend how his quiet, supposedly naive wife had orchestrated his downfall. His lawyer whispered something urgently, but Marcus shook his head, pride still overruling pragmatism. "We found his private journal," Agent Chen murmured as the court resumed, "hidden in that safety deposit box in Zurich." I'd known about the journal, had seen him writing in it late at night, documenting what he thought were victories. Now those same notes would help ensure his conviction. The private journal's contents scrolled across my screen, each entry more damning than the last. Marcus had documented everything, not just the schemes, but his thoughts on each victim. Easy mark, he'd written about the retired teacher. Desperate, to leave something for her grandkids. His sociopathic attention to emotional vulnerabilities was breathtaking. "He's attempting to make a deal," Agent Chen reported, watching Marcus huddle with his legal team during another recess, offering to reveal his entire client list in exchange for a reduced sentence. Too late. We'd already identified every victim, tracked every transaction, documented every lie. The courthouse surveillance caught an interesting interaction. Marcus's mother attempting to pass him a note through his lawyer. Security intercepted it, revealing coordinates to a storage facility in Nevada. My investigator was already en route, anticipating more hidden evidence. "Package from Zurich arrived," Sarah messaged. The Swiss safety deposit box had yielded more than just the journal. There were photographs, each one showing Marcus with different wealthy marks at various social events. He'd documented his hunting grounds, unwittingly creating a record of his predatory pattern. The prosecution introduced financial records from Marcus's earliest known scheme, an investment club he'd started in college. The jury watched video, testimony from his first victims, young students who'd trusted their charismatic classmate with their family's money. Some had never financially recovered. His encrypted cloud storage just cracked, my tech expert announced. Found emails discussing operations in at least 12 countries. The international scope of Marcus's fraud network was expanding hourly. Interpol updated their investigation map, each new connection revealing another layer of deception. Marcus's face contorted as the prosecution displayed his personal expense records. First-class flights, luxury hotels, expensive gifts for potential marks, all paid for with stolen money. The jury's expressions hardened as they saw how he'd flaunted his victims' lost savings. Another witness came forward, Agent Chen whispered. Former girlfriend from his Goldman Sachs days, says he practiced his investment pitches on her, refined his technique. The woman's testimony would show the calculated way Marcus had developed his skills, turning financial fraud into an art form. The victim's support group coordinator sent an update. 3 more families had joined the recovery program. Their stories followed familiar patterns: trust built through church connections, social clubs, charity events. Marcus had turned every community gathering into a hunting ground. His mother's foundation records are fascinating, my forensic accountant noted. She wasn't just laundering money. She was actively recruiting victims through charity galas. Like son, like mother. The sophisticated facade of philanthropy had masked a family business of fraud. Marcus's lawyer requested another recess, likely noting his client's increasing agitation. Through the security feed, I watched him pace in the holding cell, running his hands through his now unkempt hair. The polished confidence man was cracking, revealing the desperate fraudster beneath. Surveillance picked up something concerning. My security team reported. 2 of Marcus's former associates were spotted near your physical therapy practice. I authorized increased security measures. We'd anticipated potential retaliation from his network as the case progressed. The court reconvened with the prosecution introducing Marcus's travel records. Each trip carefully documented, showing how he'd built his network of victims across the country. First-class flights to wealthy communities, luxury hotel stays paid for with previous victims' money, a rolling snowball of fraud. The Nevada storage unit contained gold bars, my investigator messaged. Looks like Marcus was preparing for digital asset seizure. Another failed contingency plan. We'd known about his preference for physical assets. It was why we'd focused so heavily on tracking his movements rather than just his digital footprint. The afternoon session began with evidence from Marcus's private server, emails discussing various investment opportunities with his network of co-conspirators. His careful coding of fraudulent schemes revealed a methodical mind turned to criminal enterprise. The jury took detailed notes as the prosecutor highlighted key phrases and patterns. The prosecution's star witness took the stand as the afternoon session resumed, Marcus's personal banker from Switzerland. Through an interpreter, she detailed how he'd structured his accounts to hide stolen funds, each transaction designed to obscure its origins. The jury's attention never wavered as she mapped out the sophisticated money laundering operation. His last remaining ally just flipped, Agent Chen whispered, sliding a tablet across the gallery bench. On the screen, Marcus's longtime accountant provided a detailed confession, explaining how they'd falsified records to hide the true scope of the fraud, another support pillar crumbling beneath his carefully constructed facade. The courtroom screens displayed Marcus's social calendar from the past 5 years, each entry color-coded to show his methodical targeting of potential victims. Charity. Galas, golf tournaments, church functions. Every social event had been carefully chosen for its wealthy, trusting attendees. Security breach at his mother's house, my investigator reported. Someone tried to access her home office after hours. Local police were reviewing footage, but I already knew what they'd find. Margaret Anderson attempting to destroy evidence before it could be seized. Marcus's face turned ashen as the prosecution introduced evidence from his private safe in Monaco. The documents revealed a planned escape route, complete with fake passports and establishment of a new identity in a non-extradition country. His lawyer's objections fell flat against the mountain of physical evidence. The Victims' Recovery Fund hit another milestone, Sarah messaged. International assets are being liquidated, increasing available restitution by 30%. Each recovered dollar represented another small victory, another step toward healing for the families Marcus had devastated. A notification from Interpol lit up my screen. They'd located Marcus's backup servers in Dubai. The data recovery team was already extracting evidence of additional schemes, victims we hadn't known about, connections to other financial predators in his network. His mother's trying to cut a deal, Agent Chen murmured as the court reviewed financial records, offering to testify about his earliest schemes in exchange for immunity. Too late. We already had everything we needed from Marcus's own meticulous record-keeping. The courthouse security feed caught Marcus attempting to pass a note to one of the gallery observers. When intercepted, it revealed instructions for accessing a hidden email account. Another desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his schemes, thwarted by constant surveillance. Found his cryptocurrency cold storage, my tech, expert announced. Hidden in a series of paper wallets disguised as art in his mother's house. The recovery team was already working to access the funds, adding to the growing pool of assets available for victim restitution. Marcus's lawyer requested another conference with the judge, likely seeking any possible plea arrangement. Through the security feed, I watched my husband's shoulders slump as the judge systematically rejected each proposed deal. His options were evaporating with each passing hour. The media's running a special investigation, my coordinator reported. They're calling it The Con Man's Wife, How One Woman Dismantled an International Fraud Network. I declined their interview requests. This story wasn't about revenge or personal triumph, it was about justice and recovery. The afternoon brought testimony from Marcus's former assistant, detailing how she'd helped arrange meetings with potential victims. Her immunity deal had loosened her tongue, providing intimate details of how he'd selected and groomed his targets. Another offshore account surfaced, my financial investigator noted. This one in the Maldives, holding assets from his earliest schemes. The discovery provided a direct link between his college scams and his later, more sophisticated operations, completing our timeline of his criminal evolution. The court adjourned for the day as Marcus was led back to his cell. Through the surveillance feed, I watched him pause, staring at his reflection in a window. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, revealing the desperate fraudster beneath the polished exterior. His world was collapsing, and for once, he couldn't talk his way out of the consequences. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution prepared its closing arguments. 10 days of testimony had painted a devastating portrait of Marcus's operation, but it was the final piece of evidence that would seal his fate. Agent Chen nodded slightly as the prosecutor loaded a video onto the courtroom screens. Found this in his private cloud storage, my tech expert had reported earlier. It's a training video he made for his inner circle. The footage showed Marcus teaching other con artists his techniques, meticulously explaining how to identify and exploit vulnerable targets. His own tutorial would now ensure maximum sentencing. 6 more financial institutions have frozen suspected accounts, my investigator messaged. The ripple effects of Marcus's exposure were spreading through the banking world. Compliance officers everywhere were reviewing transactions, finding patterns we'd helped them identify. The victim's support group coordinator appeared at my side with updated statistics. Beyond the financial recovery, they'd established mentoring programs, helping other fraud victims rebuild their lives. Marcus's downfall was transforming into something larger, a movement for accountability in financial crimes. His last remaining attorney just withdrew from the case, Sarah whispered. The prestigious law firm had discovered conflicts of interest in their own records, evidence that Marcus had targeted some of their other clients. His defense team now consisted of a single court-appointed lawyer. Through the courthouse security feed, I watched Margaret Anderson being processed for her own arraignment. Her designer outfit had been replaced by prison garb, her carefully maintained appearance crumbling under the weight of her charges. Like son, like mother, both facing the consequences of their choices. Interpol just confirmed something interesting, Agent Chen murmured. 3 other major fraud networks are unraveling. Marcus's contacts are turning on each other, trying to avoid his fate. The domino effect was spreading internationally, exposing decades of financial predation. The prosecution's closing argument detailed every step of Marcus's operation, from his initial targeting of victims through social connections to his sophisticated money laundering through legitimate-seeming businesses. The jury's expressions hardened as they saw the full scope of his predatory pattern. The recovery team made a breakthrough, my financial investigator reported. Found his diamond cash in a safety deposit box in Dubai. Another asset to liquidate, another source of restitution for his victims. Marcus's habit of converting stolen funds into portable valuables was becoming his undoing. The courthouse surveillance caught Marcus studying the jury as the prosecutor spoke. His usual confident smile was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. The carefully crafted persona of the successful investment manager had been stripped away, revealing the predator beneath. Your physical therapy practice's new financial literacy program is gaining attention, Sarah messaged. 3 other cities want to implement similar support systems. What had started as a cover for my investigation was evolving into a genuine resource for fraud prevention and recovery. Agent Chen's tablet displayed updated statistics from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Marcus's case was already being used as a training model, teaching investigators how to track and document complex fraud operations. His techniques, once used to deceive, would now help prevent future schemes. His former cellmate provided interesting information, my investigator noted. Marcus tried to establish new schemes from inside prison during pre-trial detention. Even facing decades of incarceration, he couldn't stop searching for targets. The evidence would ensure maximum security restrictions. The victims' impact statements had affected the jury deeply. Each story highlighted not just financial loss, but shattered trust, broken relationships, destroyed futures. Marcus shifted uncomfortably as the prosecutor reminded the jury of each victim's testimony, each life he'd calculatedly ruined. The SEC is implementing new protocols, Agent Chen explained quietly. Based on how we tracked Marcus's operations, the regulatory changes would make it harder for future predators to exploit the same vulnerabilities, his downfall creating lasting reforms in financial oversight. As the prosecutor concluded, I studied the jury's faces. They'd seen beyond Marcus's charming facade to the calculated malice beneath. The evidence was irrefutable, the pattern clear, the damage documented in exhaustive detail. Tomorrow would bring their verdict, but we already knew. Justice was finally within reach. The jury's first question came after only 2 hours of deliberation. Through the courthouse's secure messaging system, they requested access to Marcus's private journal entries from the past year. The prosecution team exchanged knowing glances. Those entries contained his most explicit admissions of guilt. His European network is falling apart, my investigator reported via encrypted chat. 3 major players turned themselves in to authorities in Geneva. The domino effect we'd anticipated was accelerating. Each confession implicated more conspirators, expanding the web of accountability. Agent Chen appeared with fresh intelligence from Interpol. They found his contingency cache in Budapest. Looks like he had another escape plan in motion. The sealed documents revealed a complex arrangement involving Eastern European banks, private security firms, and a planned disappearance protocol. The victim's recovery program hit a milestone, Sarah messaged. First round of full restitution payments. Going out tomorrow. Watching the numbers on my screen, I thought about each family receiving notification that their stolen funds were being returned. This was what real justice looked like. Marcus's court-appointed lawyer paced the courthouse corridor, his expression grim. The jury had requested his client's telephone records spanning the last 5 years, the same records that showed him coordinating with other financial predators, planning elaborate schemes across continents. Something interesting from the forensic accountants, my financial expert noted. They've traced a pattern of small donations to political campaigns, all linked to Marcus's shell companies. Another layer of his operation exposed, buying influence and legitimacy through seemingly innocent contributions. The jury's third request came before lunch. They wanted to review the surveillance footage from Marcus's training sessions with other con artists. Those videos, where he'd arrogantly documented his techniques, would prove particularly damning in determining the premeditated nature of his crimes. His mother's psychiatric evaluation came back, Agent Chen murmured, showing me the report. Margaret Anderson's assessment revealed a disturbing family history of financial manipulation, suggesting Marcus's criminal tendencies might have deeper roots than we'd initially suspected. The courthouse security feed showed an interesting development, several jurors taking detailed notes during their review of Marcus's banking records. They'd noticed a pattern we'd documented months ago, tracking how he'd systematically moved stolen funds through a series of increasingly complex transactions. The SEC implemented the first wave of new regulations, my legal advisor reported. They're calling them the Anderson Protocols, designed to prevent the kind of layered fraud Marcus specialized in. His legacy would be the opposite of what he'd intended. Instead of financial triumph, he'd inspired systemic reform. Through the surveillance system, I watched Marcus receive news that his last offshore account had been frozen. His carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperate man beneath the polished exterior. Even now, facing overwhelming evidence, he'd been counting on hidden resources. 4 more victim support groups launched today, Sarah updated, using our model for financial recovery and emotional healing. The ripple effects of our case were spreading, creating networks of support for fraud victims across the country. Marcus's downfall was catalyzing positive change. The jury requested Marcus's travel records next, specifically his private jet manifests and hotel reservations. These documents showed how he'd tracked potential victims, following wealthy retirees, to luxury resorts, infiltrating their social circles with calculated precision. Latest from the forensic team, my tech expert messaged. They cracked his secondary email server, found correspondence with known financial criminals dating back 15 years. The evidence painted a picture of a man who'd been perfecting his predatory techniques since college. As afternoon faded into evening, the jury made their final request. They wanted to review the video of Marcus's attempt to access his frozen accounts from the Cayman Islands hotel. The footage captured his last moments of freedom, still believing he'd outsmarted everyone. The image of his confidence crumbling as he realized he'd walked into our trap would likely prove persuasive. The jury foreman's hand trembled slightly as she passed the verdict form to the bailiff. After 16 hours of deliberation, the moment of judgment had arrived. Marcus sat unnaturally still at the defense table, his shoulders rigid beneath his now ill-fitting suit. The transformation from confident conman to condemned fraudster was nearly complete. "We have movement on his Asian accounts," my investigator messaged discreetly. "Singapore authorities just seized control of his trading firm's assets." Even as justice unfolded in this courtroom, the dismantling of his international network continued with mechanical precision. The judge began reading the verdicts, each guilty landing like a hammer blow: wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, identity theft, racketeering. The list continued, encompassing 27 federal charges. Marcus's face grew paler with each pronouncement. "His remaining allies are scattering," Agent Chen whispered, showing me her tablet. Live updates from Interpol tracked Marcus's former associates fleeing to remote locations, desperately trying to avoid his fate. But we'd anticipated this. Surveillance teams were already in position worldwide. Through the courthouse security feed, I watched Margaret Anderson receive news of her son's conviction in her own holding cell. Her carefully maintained composure finally cracked as she realized their family empire of fraud had crumbled completely. No more charity galas, no more social prestige. The victim restitution program just expanded, Sarah reported via secure chat. 3 major banks have agreed to expedite the recovery process. Our case had set new precedents for financial fraud recovery, creating pathways for future victims to reclaim their stolen assets. The judge moved on to asset forfeiture, listing properties, accounts, and possessions that would be liquidated. Marcus flinched as each item was named: the Manhattan penthouse, the yacht in Monaco, the private jet, the art collection. His carefully curated life of luxury dismantled piece by piece. Breaking news from Switzerland, my financial investigator noted. They've located his private vault in Geneva. Contents match the missing Cayman Islands transfers. Another piece of his escape plan thwarted. Another resource redirected to victim compensation. Marcus's court-appointed lawyer requested a brief recess, likely noting his client's deteriorating composure. Through my tablet's feed, I watched Marcus pace his holding cell, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. No more schemes, no more escapes, no more second chances. The SEC's new task force is operational, Agent Chen updated. They're using our investigation as a training model. Marcus's techniques, once used to deceive, would now help prevent future fraud. His legacy would be the strengthening of the very systems he'd exploited. The sentencing phase began with victim impact statements. One by one, those whose lives Marcus had shattered took the stand. The retired teacher who'd lost her grandchildren's college fund. The widower who'd invested his late wife's life insurance. The young couple whose small business had been destroyed. 4 more support groups launched today, Sarah messaged, using our recovery program template. What had started as my personal quest for justice had evolved into a movement, helping fraud victims rebuild their lives and confidence. The judge's expression grew sterner with each testimony. Marcus had targeted not just wealth, but trust, dreams, futures. His sophisticated financial schemes had left emotional devastation in their wake, a factor that would heavily influence his sentencing. His last hidden server just came online, my tech expert reported. Found evidence of planned operations in 12 more countries. Even facing justice, Marcus had been preparing future schemes. The discovery would ensure maximum security restrictions during his incarceration. Through the courtroom's surveillance system, I watched realization dawn in Marcus's eyes as the judge prepared to announce his sentence. He finally understood. There would be no last-minute escape, no clever manipulation, no trading of information for leniency. The game was over, and he had lost everything. The judge's voice carried through the hushed courtroom as she began the sentencing statement. Mr. Anderson, your crimes represent not just a violation of law, but a betrayal of fundamental human trust. Each word seemed to physically impact Marcus, his shoulders slumping further with every pronouncement. His cryptocurrency wallet just unlocked, my tech expert messaged. The automated timer expired. Marcus had set up time-locked digital vaults, planning to access them after serving a minimal sentence. Instead, they'd become additional assets for victim restitution. Agent Chen slid a tablet across the gallery bench, displaying live updates. From Interpol. 3 more members of Marcus's international network had been apprehended while trying to liquidate shared assets. The domino effect of his conviction was spreading across continents. The Victims Support Foundation reached a milestone, Sarah reported quietly. 500 families now enrolled in financial recovery programs. What had started as my personal quest for justice had evolved into a nationwide support network, helping fraud victims rebuild their shattered lives. The judge detailed each component of Marcus's sentence: 30 years federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, restitution payments totaling millions, lifetime ban from financial industries, no possibility of parole for 20 years. The penalties mounted, each one dismantling another piece of his future plans. Breaking news from Dubai, my investigator noted. They've located his backup identity cache. Hidden in a private vault were passports, credit cards, and documentation for 6 different aliases. Marcus had prepared elaborate escape routes, now rendered useless by comprehensive international cooperation. Through the courthouse security feed, I watched Margaret Anderson receive news of her son's sentence. Her reaction was telling, not grief for her son's fate, but rage at the destruction of their family's carefully constructed facade of respectability. The Anderson dynasty of fraud was officially ended. The SEC is implementing Phase 2 of the Anderson Protocols, Agent Chen whispered. New algorithms to detect the kind of layered transactions Marcus specialized in. His techniques, once used to deceive, would now strengthen the very systems he'd exploited. A fitting irony. Marcus's court-appointed lawyer made one final attempt at mitigation, citing his client's willingness to cooperate. The judge's response was swift and devastating. She'd reviewed the surveillance showing him attempting to establish new schemes even during pretrial detention. 4 major investment firms have adopted our fraud prevention framework, my financial advisor reported. The ripple effects of the case were transforming the industry, creating new standards for investor protection and fraud detection. Marcus's downfall was catalyzing systemic change. The courtroom screens displayed the final tally of recovered assets, properties in 12 countries, bank accounts in 28 jurisdictions, art collections, luxury vehicles, private aircraft. Each item represented dozens of victims whose lives he'd impacted. Now these assets would fund their recovery. His prison assignment came through, Agent Chen noted. Maximum security with enhanced monitoring. Every communication would be scrutinized, every interaction supervised. The master manipulator would find no opportunities to weave new schemes from behind bars. The victims' gallery remained silent as the judge concluded sentencing. These weren't people celebrating revenge. They were witnesses to justice, watching the systematic dismantling of the machine that had nearly destroyed their lives. Their focus had shifted from persecution to recovery. The financial literacy program is expanding, Sarah messaged. 6 more cities adopting our model. My physical therapy practice had evolved into something larger, a center for both physical and financial healing, helping people rebuild strength in all aspects of their lives. Marcus stared straight ahead as officers approached with handcuffs. The designer suit hung loose on his frame, his manicured appearance beginning to fray. The mask of the confident investment manager had crumbled completely, revealing the desperate fraudster beneath. His final performance had reached its end. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I stood in my office reviewing the final impact reports. The wall of monitors displayed real-time updates from our victim recovery network, each screen showing another aspect of healing and restoration. What had begun as my personal quest for justice had transformed into something far more significant. Latest statistics from the SEC, Agent Chen announced, entering with her tablet. Financial fraud rates down 30% since implementing the E. Anderson protocols. Marcus's techniques, now thoroughly documented and understood, had become a blueprint for prevention rather than deception. The Victims Foundation had evolved beyond our initial vision. Sarah coordinated programs across 20 states, helping fraud survivors rebuild not just their finances, but their trust in others. The support groups Marcus's crimes had inadvertently created were changing lives, offering hope where he'd once sown devastation. Final asset recovery numbers just came in, my financial investigator reported. 98% of stolen funds located and returned. The meticulous documentation of Marcus's schemes had enabled unprecedented success in restitution. His victims were receiving something rare in financial fraud cases: actual recovery. Through my secure feed, I watched Margaret Anderson begin her own sentence at a federal women's facility. The former socialite, now inmate number 247891, would spend 12 years contemplating how her enabling of Marcus's behavior had contributed to countless ruined lives. The family legacy was now one of cautionary tales rather than social prestige. Your physical therapy practice's financial healing program is being studied at 3 universities, Sarah noted. They're calling it the new standard in trauma recovery. What had started as a cover for my investigation had become a model for holistic rehabilitation, treating both financial and emotional wounds. Marcus's prison reports showed no signs of reformation. Even in maximum security, he attempted to manipulate fellow inmates and staff, earning himself additional restrictions. The consummate performer couldn't stop playing confidence games, even when his audience consisted solely of security cameras. Interpol's final sweep is complete, Agent Chen updated. The last of his international network has been dismantled. Like falling dominoes, Marcus's associates had tumbled one after another, their shared schemes exposed by the evidence we'd gathered. The global web of fraud had unraveled completely. The courthouse where Marcus had faced justice now hosted weekly financial literacy workshops. Former victims became mentors, helping others identify and avoid similar schemes. The very location of his downfall had transformed into a center for education and empowerment. The documentary crews are still requesting interviews, my media coordinator mentioned. They're calling it the most significant financial fraud exposure of the decade. But this story wasn't about sensational headlines or dramatic revelations. It was about justice, recovery, and systematic change. Through my office windows, I watched new clients arrive at the physical therapy practice. Some came for traditional rehabilitation, others for financial recovery counseling. Many needed both. The practice had evolved into a healing center for all types of injuries, visible and invisible. Your case study is now required reading at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Agent Chen commented. The methodical documentation of Marcus's schemes had created a template for future investigations. His downfall would help prevent countless others from suffering similar fates. The final piece of Marcus's empire, a hidden art collection in a Geneva vault, had been liquidated that morning. The proceeds would fund scholarships for children of fraud victims, turning his spoils of deception into tools for education and advancement. Even his greed would now serve a greater purpose. As sunset painted the sky, I reviewed one last set of documents. The divorce papers, finally processed and complete. Marcus's signature, scrawled from his prison cell, marked the end of our 12-year facade. The quiet, naive wife he'd underestimated had orchestrated not just his downfall, but a revolution in financial fraud prevention and recovery. The monitors continued their silent display of lives being rebuilt, systems being strengthened, trust being restored. Marcus had sought to create a legacy of wealth built on deception. Instead, his greatest achievement would be the reforms and protections his crimes had inspired. Sometimes, I reflected, justice creates something far more valuable than revenge.